All right, well, welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about learning how to create your brand story so that you can stand out online. Sharing your story is one of the easiest ways to set yourself apart from the competition and stand out in an overcrowded market space. As you guys know, there's a lot of people out there doing what you do, and sometimes we have to make ourselves look a little bit or stand out in a different way so that we can attract those that we want to connect with and those that we want to work with. And it's hard sometimes, right? We are so used to watching what everybody else is doing. Sometimes we have to step back and see what ways we can show up authentically and put ourselves out there in a way that's authentic to us and doesn't have us feeling like a fraud or like somebody we're not trying to be, especially in the online space. And maybe you guys have done this too. You've seen somebody else who's in your industry and you're like, oh, well, they're doing this, so that's working for them, so I need to do that too. And then when you try to do it, it doesn't work for you. You don't get a million clients. You don't get like the 50 million likes like they got when they posted something similar. And you're like, you beat yourself up a little bit for it, right? You're like, well, if they're doing it, you would think that I could do the exact same thing and attract people in. And the problem with that is they're doing what works for them. They're sharing their pieces of their story that makes sense for them. And that might not be what makes sense for you. So we have to kind of uncover and dig up what it is that's about ourselves that makes us unique and special. And we play to those strengths so that we can authentically attract people into us. So today we're going to be talking about the 3 reasons why most people are afraid to share their story. And these are the 3 reasons that I've heard the most. So we'll talk about what those are. I'm also going to share the difference in knowing when you should share a story versus when you should hold off and maybe you're not ready to yet. We're also going to talk about why using story in your messaging connects you at a deeper level with your ideal client. So we'll talk about those. And for those of you that don't know me, my name's Darlene Hawley, and I'm a personal branding and business clarity coach. And I help ambitious, heart-centered online entrepreneurs who want to create a successful personal brand and business, but they're kind of afraid to share their unique story. They're afraid to put themselves out there, but they know that they want to share their message with the world. They want to make an impact, and they want to attract their dream clients to them so they can have the freedom to live the life that they want to and the flexibility that they desire, right? Because most of us as entrepreneurs, we start our own business because we want to do things our way. We want to have the flexibility to maybe be home with our children or to travel a little bit. So attracting people in a way that makes sense to us allows us to have that flexibility in our schedule. All right, so the 3 reasons why most people are afraid to share their story. So, there's a lot of reasons I feel like that I could have listed here, but I want to share like the top 3 that I've heard the most from clients, and even just from being in other Facebook communities or talking with people at networking events of kind of what I hear is like the main reasons we're afraid to share our story. So the first one is that I hear a lot is that my story is not that special. Anybody maybe relate to that? Like at times we might think like, what's so special about me that somebody else would want to lean in or want to learn more about me? But the cool thing is no one has the exact same story. Every single one of us has our own unique story that sets us apart. If you look at somebody else in your industry who maybe you follow and you see is maybe getting a lot of engagement or different things, their story works for them because it's their story. That's what's special about them. So we each have lived our own different lives. We've had different experiences, different things that have happened to us. The way that I take something might be totally different, or the way that I hear something might be totally different from how you hear something else, just because of our life lessons, right? We've all grown up in different households, maybe different cities, different places. And so how we take in that information, we hear it differently. We respond to it in different ways. So it's a different point of view for you that you're able to share with your audience. So remember, you're completely unique, and your story is special because it's yours and it's only yours alone, and you get to share it in a way that makes sense to you. So let's bust that myth, right? Like, you are special. You have something unique about you to share. So that was kind of the number 1 thing that I hear. The number 2 thing I hear is nobody cares about my story. Why does anybody care about me? First off, I want to say, yes, they do. They do care. We need your story. I want you to be proud of your story and share it in a way that people will lean in and want to learn more. Have you ever had those conversations where people kind of lean in a little bit further and they're genuinely interested in what you're sharing? They want to hear more from you. They're not doing it because they're trying to be nice. Like, especially if you're having those conversations and they're leaning in and they're like, tell me more about that. Like, how did that happen? What changed for you after that happened? It's because they do care. They're engaged. They want to learn more from you. So you have the ability to change lives by opening up and sharing what you've gone through and how it's changed you and how it's made you the person that you are today. So bust that myth. If you think that nobody cares about your story, I'm telling you right now, they do. And the third one I hear all the time is, I don't like to talk about me. If I talk about me, that makes me selfish. I hear that one all the time. Well, it's selfish for me just to talk about me and share all my things. And maybe if at some points it can be, right? We've all had those friends, or maybe it's just me. We've had those people where you're on the phone with them and you might spend 45 minutes on the phone and they've spoken the whole entire 45 minutes and they didn't even one time ask you anything like, how was your day? Or what's been going on with you? And you hang up the phone and it kind of feels dirty and gross, right? You're like, I just gave all that attention to this person and helped solve all their problems. And they didn't even ask like how I am or what's going on with me. So people they get worried, like they don't want to come off as being arrogant or only talking about their self. But it's okay to talk about ourselves, especially as online entrepreneurs. We're out there sharing our message, and people, in order to build that know, like, trust factor, we have to talk a little bit about us. Like, how did we start our business? What was it that brought us to where we're at today? We get so caught up in our head worrying so much about what other people might think about us that we forget that we're sharing these pieces of our past and stories that have made an impact on us that are going to help them as well. Because as we're sharing stories about ourselves, we're also tying it in to who our ideal client is and how it's going to resonate and relate to them. And I'll get into that a little bit further down in our training, but like, we don't want to just always share stories. If we're sharing stories just to share stories, we're not really connecting with our audience, right? Like, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, is the story going to connect us to our audience? Is it a story that makes sense to them that they would want to know about? Or are we just talking to talk? Because if we're just talking to talk, then we're talking to nobody typically, especially in our businesses. So the key is not to make it about you. It's about helping others and helping them heal or helping them resonate or connect with us. So think about the people who are going through something right now, and that you're going to be able to help shape or shift their perspective on something based off of the experiences that you've had. So if you don't like talking about yourself, you don't have to talk about yourself in like that arrogant way. You just want to share pieces of yourself that are going to have people leaning in. They're going to feel connected to you. You'll build that trust, right? Because as entrepreneurs, we want to build trust with our audience. If we don't have trust with them, we don't have anything. We want to be able to, we have to have a reason that they're going to want to talk to us, that they're going to want to communicate with us. So those are kind of the three things I hear the most. My story is not that special. Nobody cares about my story. I don't like to talk about me. And it's okay to have those feelings and those thoughts. But let's kind of see why we need storytelling in our messaging. So why do we use story in our messaging? To connect at a deeper level with our audience or our ideal client. Most of us connect most through stories. I remember being a kid and camping with my family, and we sat around the fireplace at the end of the night, and we roasted s'mores, we had hot chocolate, we spent that time together, and it would always be based around storytelling though. Somebody was telling a scary, spooky story at the fireplace, right? Or they were just sharing stories from when they were a kid. And those are the types of things that kind of bonds you together as just human beings in general. So as you're sharing your story, you're building that same kind of bond with your ideal audience. So here's some numbers for you guys that I thought were super interesting. So we hear over 3,000 different marketing messages every single day. And that's whether we're listening to a podcast, we're watching the news in the morning, we're listening to the radio on our way to the grocery store or to meet a client. we're bombarded basically with over 3,000 messages. So it's super noisy out there, right? Like we have to stand out against all that noise. Your ideal clients are not just following you, as much as I'd love to say like, oh yeah, they're following you all the time and they hear every single message that you say. We're competing not even just in our own industries. We're competing against all the noise that's out there online, on TV, on the radio. So it's hard sometimes to stand out because somebody might be genuinely interested in speaking to you and talking to you and learning more from you, but they get distracted like this, right? I'm a mom, so sometimes I have great intentions. Sometimes I'll be focused working on something, and before I can even finish what I was working on, I have a kid who needs help getting a popsicle out of the freezer, or they're hungry for the 336th time, and we get pulled away. We get distracted really quickly. So even if somebody wants to work with you and is following you because they're excited to have you help them with their business, or maybe they're coming to you to get some healing and help, they can be pulled very quickly away because there's so much distractions out there. Another statistic that I love is your ideal clients are 22 times more likely to resonate with what you're sharing when you add story into how you're sharing it. So if you're creating a blog post, or if you're creating a social media post, or creating a Facebook Live, or some kind of video content, or hosting a networking event even, the more often that you add story into what you're sharing, the easier it is for people to relate to you, to resonate, and to want to learn more and connect because you're sharing that story piece with them. Does that make sense? So just having, even if you're sharing a short blog post, add some story to it. Like what about the blog that you're writing? How can you add some story into it from things that you've seen with clients? Because sometimes it doesn't have to be our story either, right? We can share client stories. We don't have to name names. We don't have to get super specific. But you might have like a one-line sentence from something that you saw come up with another client that you can add into what you're sharing about, just to resonate and pull them in a little bit more. So they're 22 times, I keep saying percent, 22 times more likely to resonate when you share story. So what about standing out from the competition? You don't need to be better than anybody else. You just need to be different so you can stand out amongst the crowd. And the way that you can be different the easiest is by just sharing stories and being authentically showing up as who you are, and sharing things that have happened either at past experiences or things that are currently happening, or sharing like those case studies and testimonials of some of your clients as well. So think about it. When you meet someone for their first time, you're super curious about them, right? I hope that's not just me. I'm naturally a curious person. So I want to find out, like I ask a lot of questions sometimes, maybe too many questions, but I'm like, tell me about yourself. How did you grow up? How did like when they share a piece of their story, like I'll ask a couple of questions because I'm curious. I want to learn more about, what makes them tick, what makes them who they are today. And when you ask a ton of questions based off their answers and stories that they share, you can tell pretty quickly too if they're your people, right? If they're somebody that you're going to want to spend time with. And it goes both ways, whether you're the entrepreneur who's talking with a potential client, or maybe if you're a potential client and you're looking to get help from somebody else, like you want to make sure that they're your people. That's how I like to say it. They're your people. You want to connect with them. They're your tribe or your community, or they're going to get who you are. And they're not going to make you feel like you're not connected at the right level with them. You want to make sure it's part of they're part of your community. It's building community with them. So the people you choose to have around you will not all be clients. Some of them will become friends. Some of them will become collaboration partners, referral partners. Hopefully they'll turn into what I call raving fans. So even if you don't work with somebody, they might still be somebody who you do a Facebook Live in their group, or maybe they're a referral partner and they're going to be like a great connection person for you. So even if you're sharing your story, it doesn't always have to be about like getting clients and like drawing only clients in. It's also about just building true, authentic relationships with them so that you can have somebody who's a raving fan, and who, if somebody goes, I need a CPA, like I know who to call. Or if I hear somebody who's struggling, in their marriage and they're looking for support and help, I'm like, I already know who you can call. You don't have to like always be thinking of every single person you talk to as somebody who's going to automatically do business with you. They're going to throw money at you. And as amazing as that is when that happens, like that's great. But you also want to just build normal relationships where you're able to connect at a deep level with them. And it's not easy sharing some of our stories, right? A lot of us have stories for why we started our business because of things that have happened to us in our past. And some of them are easy to tell, and it's a no-brainer, I'll say. Like it's easy to share that story, where other of us might have stories where maybe we lost somebody special to us, or big changes have happened in our lives. And it's sometimes those are the stories that are a little bit harder to share. And we can still share them when we're ready, but we want to make sure that we're in the right spot, in the right place for that. Maybe you're familiar with Brene Brown. She's one of my favorite authors, and she shares in one of her books that you want to share from the scar, not from the wound. And I love that because it gives you like that perfect visual. Like if you're still going through a situation or things are still messy and you haven't really dealt with it yet, maybe it's not the right time to share it as part of your business to attract ideal clients in, right? So if you, like part of my story was that like one of the big shifts that helped me to start my business was when I lost my mom. And it took me a long time to even tell people in my business, like that little bit of story. And I don't always go super deep into it. It doesn't have to be like, I don't have to take the story down to like the why or the how. It could just be that I lost my mom. And that was like the pivotal moment for me, that I knew that I didn't want to live the life that I was living anymore. And I wanted to show up to the world in a different way. I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to be more than what I was at that time. So those stories, you can use those to kind of shape how you show up to your audience. And if you're not ready, like it's good to ask yourself, like, am I ready to share this story? And if you can't share it without crying or getting choked up or having to pause for a really long time, like maybe you're not ready for that yet. But one day, maybe you will. So I always teach my clients to have what I call like a story bank, and I have them use it. They can either use it like on a Google Doc or in Trello or something. But if they have a story they feel like they might be able to one day share with their audience, but they're not sure like how it relates to their business yet or whatever, they just write down the story. It could be something like random. Like one of the stories I have in my story bank was about how I took my truck to the auto mechanic. And it was making this, it was still drivable and it was making this funny noise and it wasn't getting power. But as I was like coming home from that, I was like, oh, I could totally relate this to my business. Like how you might have like a hole in your business. And like, if that's what's causing you to not feel like you're driving on all cylinders or whatever. I'm like, oh, I could use that story one day. I haven't used it yet. I haven't felt like it like pulled into like the right blog post yet or the right time to use it till maybe this moment. But having a story bank for just keeping stories that you can pull up at any given time is always a great place just to hold on to extra stories that you're like, oh, maybe I could share this story. I don't know if I'm ready yet. Maybe you're too involved in it still, or it's too emotional or too raw. But one day, like I might be able to use this story as part of my business to share from. And then, so I teach what I call my signature framework for creating your brand story so that you can quickly identify which stories to share and which pieces are the key to telling your story online. So I have it kind of broken down into a 5-step framework that we're going to go through today of kind of the best way to figure out like how do we create our brand story so that as we're on a podcast or if we're sharing our story just on our About Me page, which pieces of our story are important for our audience to know so that they can lean in, feel like they resonate, build that know, like, trust factor. And step 1 that I work with my clients on is I just have them brainstorm or do what you could even call it like a questioning storm. Like just sit down with a piece of paper and write down every single thing that's happened to you that comes to mind. And maybe you set a timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and write down every single thing that's happened that you can think of that might be impactful to why you started your business. And it could be anything from early childhood memories. It could be something that happened when you were a teenager, something as a young adult when you were in college, or maybe you saw somebody else go through something and it triggered for you. Well, oh, I think I could do that. I could start my own business, or I could put myself out there and do something on my own without having to work for somebody else. So I always have them sit down and just brainstorm. So do like a massive brain dump is step one. And it's funny because some of the things that come up, some of it won't relate whatsoever to your business. And you're like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that story in a long time. Like it could be like a childhood memory or whatnot. But those are all pieces that are good. You might not use it for creating your brand story, but they might all be fun stories that at some point you could share. Or if for nothing else, it just has like that nostalgic memory, right, of our childhood, of different things. Maybe you had a lemonade stand and that was like your first entrepreneurial journey, was, you know, sitting in front of your mom and dad's house and mom going to the store and buying a bunch of lemons and you adding sugar, lemons, and water, and the neighbors came by and you're like, oh, this is super fun. I just made like $2 because I had a lemonade stand. And maybe that was like part of your story. But they're different for all of us. But just write all of those down. All right. And then step 2 is I want you to ask yourself 4 questions. So the first question is, what happened? The second question is, how were you impacted by what happened? Question 3, what changed for you after whatever it is that happened? What was it that changed for you? And then what lessons did you learn from that? And so by taking all of that, all the stories that you have brain dumped on your piece of paper, ask yourself those questions about each of those stories that you wrote down. And see, well, maybe this one wasn't that big of a deal. Maybe this isn't like my big impactful story. Or maybe some of them you're like, oh, you know what? This one actually really resonates. And it actually is going to really resonate with my audience, which I'll get to in just a second, and how you want to make sure what you're sharing also doesn't just resonate with you in part of your story, but it also resonates to your audience. But ask yourself those 4 questions. What happened? How were you impacted by it? What changed for you? And what lessons did you learn? And then step 3 is where you take that massive brain dump. So you have all the different ideas. You've gone through the 4 questions with them. And then I want you to circle 3 stories that you feel like made the biggest impact for you starting your business. And I want you to circle them. So look through and see like, okay, and obviously most of us are, we have to maybe take some time later today or whatnot to like write all this out. But after you have all those stories written out and you've asked yourself those questions, circle the 3 that made the biggest impact. So when I did this exercise for myself, the ones that stood out the most for me was I was a single mom. Some of you guys might know this about me already, but I had my oldest son. He actually turned 24 yesterday, which is crazy. But I was 17 when I was pregnant. I was pregnant my senior year of high school. And I had him about 3 months after I graduated high school. So that's a big part of my story, right? Like I was 17, I was pregnant my senior year in high school, and I was a mom at 18 years old. Like that's a big part of who I am. That's kind of how, like, I feel like I grew up with my son. Like he raised me just as much as I raised him because I was such a young mom. So that was like one that I circled for me, like teen mom. I kicked butt, like I raised an amazing young man, and like I was a single mom on top of that. I did it on my own. Like yes, I had support from my family. My mom and my grandma helped me a ton, but I didn't have the support from his dad. And so 18 years old, single mom, kicking butt in the world, like that's a big part of my story. And then after I got my first job, like I graduated high school, went to college some, and I ended up working in retail management. And I worked my way up from cashier to operations manager in about 3.5 years. And so I was able to support my son very well. I was working a ton of hours though. So that next piece of my story that like really resonated for me was I was a single mom working 60 plus hours a week. So as a mom, and some of you maybe can relate to this, some of you maybe not, but I was missing out on some of like those big moments because I was working 60 hours a week. I missed, like I don't remember if I missed like his exact first step, but like I remember just missing like those little, like he started crawling, he started walking. I wasn't there all the time, and I missed that. Like I had like some of that mom guilt, right, that I was holding on to. And so I kept questioning myself, like, why am I doing this? Why am I working nights and weekends and missing tucking my son in bed every single night for a job that I pretty much felt like I was disposable of, right? Like retail management, like it wasn't my calling. It wasn't like my number one career choice. It's just what worked really well for me when I had the job. I worked myself up quickly. I was making good money quickly. And so it was comfortable, right? So I was just staying in a position that I knew that I had job security. And I also had that fear in the back of my head, like you are a single mom, like you have to provide an income. You have to be able to provide a lifestyle for yourself and for your son. But that was like part of my story, right? So single mom, working 60 hours a week. Those were big ones. Another one that I circled was losing my mom suddenly. Some of you guys on the call today know, like I lost my mom tragically in a car accident when I was 22 years old. And she was my best friend. She was my rock. She was like my everything. And she also helped me a ton with my son. So a lot shifted in my life. And I can specifically remember that exact moment when I knew that I had to do things differently. And that was at her service. After the like memorial piece of it, we were walking down to the burial site, and it was all on the same property, but it was a decent walk to where her spot was at. And I remember being up at the front, and I turned around, and I was like, I just melted in awe of how many people had come to support my mom, and how many people, and I just realized like in that moment, how much of an impact my mom had made on all these people. And I knew for myself, like right there, I was like, I need to do things differently. Like, I don't want to work 60 plus hours a week anymore. I don't want to miss these things that I was missing with my son. So that was another one that I circled. Like, that's a story that I tell, and for it connects with people. People can resonate with that because we all have that aha moment at some point where we're like, we don't want to do this anymore. We need to make a change. Like, how do we go from point A to point B? And that was one for me. That was like a big, huge aha moment for myself, that it's time for a change. Like, Darlene, like you can't keep living. Like, you're not happy with how things are being lived. And I learned quickly that week how quickly life can how short life is, and how we don't know what to expect, or how much time we have even. And I knew I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to be able to connect with people in a totally different way. And I wanted to do it my way and have the flexibility to be home with my son while I did it. So those are some examples of like stories that you might have on your brain dump that you might be able to connect back. And then there's another piece. So step 4 of it. So when we're sharing our story and we're connecting with people, it's not always just about us, right? Especially as entrepreneurs and as business owners, we have to also share stories that connect to our ideal client, so that our ideal client knows that we can help them, right? We're going to help them with whatever pain they're going through. If they're struggling with a situation, we're going to be the ones that they come to help get out of that pain and go from struggle and hurting to desired of happy and joyful, or getting through the situation. So you also so step 4 is all about looking at how your story resonates with your audience, because it's not just about us. So there's a couple ways that you can really identify if your story is going to resonate with your audience. And the easiest way to find that out is just to talk to people. Do what I call market research and talk to your ideal clients. If you know somebody at a networking group, or even a good friend of yours who you feel like, you know what, Susie would be a great person to talk to. I feel like she's my ideal client. I wonder if I called her up and took her to coffee, if I could ask her a couple of questions to see like how my story resonates with her and which pieces she feels like might connect me the most. So ask them, what's your biggest, and when you get your ideal client, so I'm going to call her Susie for this sake. So if you sit down with Susie, or if you're on the phone with her, you can ask her, what is your biggest struggle or pain right now? And then ask, what is it that you desire? What's your end goal? Like, what would you change? And then ask, what's standing in your way from going from that point A to point B? And then also ask, like, what needs to happen to get you from that struggle to desire? Like, what type of moving pieces? Do you need to be coached on something? Do you need to have specific questions done? Do you need to create a plan that would be beneficial? And then that's how you can backplay your story to make it connect with your audience. So you've done the brainstorm. You've asked yourself a bunch of questions. What happened? How you were impacted? What changed for you? What lessons did you learn? You circled the 3 connecting pieces from your story that you feel like would resonate. And now you're testing it against the market research in step 4. You're talking to a real life ideal client, somebody who would be the perfect person for you in your business. Like for me, that would be an online entrepreneur who wants to start a business and wants to make sure they have a strong, solid foundation. So I would want to find somebody who either started a business already and is struggling to get the traction that they're looking for, or it might be somebody who is brand new and they haven't even started their business yet. And then I can help them set up that foundation from the get-go in a solid way so that it would make sense for them to grow their business. So doing real live conversations with people who are your ideal client is gold, because you can take those questions that you ask them, you can then write down what they say and use that in your messaging and in your marketing and in your blogs. It gives you like blog topic ideas and different things, because you're able to take all that information from that conversation and then use it to attract your ideal clients in, because you just got right from the horse's mouth the topic information that you can share as part of your story. And then step 5 is just putting it together in a way that makes sense for your ideal client. So it makes sense for you, for what your story is, as well as you're taking into consideration who your ideal client is and what they're looking for. So you can do it kind of, maybe you're familiar with like the story arcs, but you want to kind of take them from like transformation point A to point B, how you can help them. So from struggle to desire. So you'll map out your story. So I shared my connecting pieces with you guys already. So part of what I tell people is, that I was a single mom. I was working 60 plus hours a week. I wanted to be home more with my son. I didn't do it quite yet, right? Like it takes a minute. Like we don't just like automatically decide we want to do something. Sometimes we take the slow route. I took the slow route. Maybe that's just me. But I knew like I didn't want to work nights and weekends anymore when I was a single mom. But it took me losing my mom and realizing how short life was for me to do something about it. And it was after I lost my mom that I decided, you know what? It's time for me to do something different. And that's when I started looking for a career path that would get me to be able to be home more with my son and not to be gone in evenings anymore and not be gone for weekends when he was doing, like learning soccer for his first year of soccer, different things like that. And then that's how I started my business. I was longing for something different. So I started looking at different career paths. And that's when I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know I was going to be a business coach. Like that wasn't even on my radar, but I was interviewed by somebody who did business coaching franchises. And during that conversation with somebody on a phone call that I just did for practice and for fun as an interview, I found my life calling. And as she was telling me about the business coaching franchise, I was like, oh my gosh, I was like nodding the whole entire time. I'm like, I'm already doing all of these things inside of a retail corporation. I was operations, HR management. I was training development. I was helping employees go from one position and growing within the organization. I can't even tell you, probably like 20 to 30 employees that I worked up within the company. And some of them left the company because of the training they were able to get inside of where I worked and were able to take that on to other companies. And I was like, this is what I'm already doing. Like that's where my passion was at. It wasn't working in the retail environment. It was helping other people realize what their life goals were and helping them take it to the next level. And that's when I was like, oh, like I could totally do this on my own as my own business, help other people start business. Like, and I had a shift obviously, because I wasn't teaching them how to run a business. I was teaching them how to move up and develop and grow. And I had a shift and I learned those tools for doing that within my own business. But those are the stories because of connecting those dots that I'm able to tell and how I started my business today. So you want to go really deep with your story. You want to share stories that connect And they're not the thing that's cool about this too is it's not a cookie cutter story. You're building a story that's based off of you and your life. And that's how you're going to stand out when you're talking to other people online. That's how you're going to stand out at a networking event, because you're sharing who you are, and people are going to want to learn more because you're authentically showing up as you. You're not trying to be somebody else. You're not telling, like, I can't tell your story as my own, right? Because it wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't be able to resonate with it. I wouldn't be able to like share it in the right way that people would like get who I was and how I came to be where I am today. Like, you get to tell your story, those pieces of your past, those pieces where, and like, I kind of like to envision it like as like breadcrumbs, right? Like, they're like the breadcrumbs that led you to where you are today, because we've all had things happen. Some of them have been ugly and hard, and other things were just, mom guilt or beating ourselves up. But those are all the things. Like, I could have stayed in retail management. I was doing really well with my career. I could have taken it to district or worked my way up even further in the company, but I didn't want to. I wanted to live my life my way. And that was how I was able to step away and do things differently. And because I did that, I now have my own business. I'm able to be successful working my own business without having to work for somebody else. And most of us as entrepreneurs, like, that's why we do this, right? I like to joke and say that I'm unemployable, because like, I couldn't imagine like working for somebody else again. Like, you get so used to like doing things your way, that it just makes it nice when you're able to live the life of your dreams and make your dreams happen based off of your story and how you've done the work to get where you are today. And I like to say, there's a saying, and I think it's Zig Ziglar, but don't hold me to that one, but he says that facts tell and stories sell. So the more stories you tell, the easier it is for you to attract your ideal clients to you and to make money in your business and to get your dream clients, because they resonate and they relate to you. And then as you share the story, you're able to use it. I think I said this already, but you can use it on your About Me page. You can use it online in all your social media posts. You can share it on podcasts if you're being interviewed, or in Facebook groups if people have you in. And people are curious. They always want to know, like, well, how did you start your business? Like, how did you do this? Like, because you've done the work and created your brand story, it's super easy for you to share your story and share the right stories, right? Because I also shared earlier, like, you don't want to share some stories. Some stories aren't going to resonate with your ideal client, or maybe you're too emotional still, you're too raw. But you get to share the stories that make sense the best for you. And it also connects to those that you want to work with and those that you want to attract. And if you find yourself struggling on which parts of your story to share, like after you've gone through these 5-step frameworks, if you still feel like you're super stuck and you're not sure how to share your story in a way that makes sense and connects, let me know. I do offer an introductory Uncover Your Story coaching session. That's just a 90-minute coaching session that walks you through mostly the 5 steps that I've already shared with you, but then I ask questions and I dig deep with you and make sure that you're sharing the right pieces of yourself so that you are attracting the ideal clients towards you. So it's hard to share our story sometimes. Like I said in the beginning, like those things that people always tell me, like, my story is not special, or nobody cares about my story, or I don't like to talk about me. Like, it's time to let go of all of that thought process and all of those stories that you're telling yourself. And it's time to just show up authentically as yourself and start connecting with your dream clients and building the business that makes sense for you. And the more that you're able to share your story and show up online and connect with people, that's when you're going to have the business that makes the most sense for you and have you connecting from the heart. So I hope that resonates with all of you guys today. Thank you so much for joining me as we walk through that journey of creating your business and sharing your story in a way that makes sense for you.